Book of the Dead becoming God in ancient Egypt. Production and use. How a Book of the Dead manuscript was produced. The ritual context of the Book of the Dead. Rituals for the living. Part 1. In addition to their well-known role in mortuary rites, a considerable number of spells familiar to us from Books of the Dead, perhaps as many as 55 of the 192 spells, were used in rituals during life. Living Egyptians employed them in temple rituals, for personal protection, or in preparation for the journey through the afterlife. In fact, a number of Book of the Dead spells that appeared on temple walls or on personal amulets were probably originally composed as temple liturgies or magical incantations, and only later adapted for funerary use. The ritual functions of some spells used by the living matched their post-mortem role, but many were intentionally modified for funerary use. At the same time, adaptation also occurred in the opposite direction, where Book of the Dead spells were adjusted to fit earthly rituals. The history of these spells is likely much more complicated, with texts being adapted and readapted between mortuary and non-mortuary functions throughout the centuries. Spells known from the Book of the Dead were employed in a variety of temple rituals, as initiations, hymns, offering spells, and cosmographical texts documenting religious knowledge. Not surprisingly, these spells are particularly common in the contexts of Osirian mythology, where the deceased and resurrected god Osiris joins the sun god Re in his cycle through the netherworld to be reborn each day. The similarity between private funerary texts and practices and the temple cult of Osiris suggests mutual influence. Whether conceived in the temple or in the mortuary context, the spells were usually revised to fit the new environment. Thus, spells 110 and 148 recorded in Medinet Habu omit direct references to death and the afterlife, replacing them with formulae for the living king. Spells 144 to 146 deal with the gates and portals of the netherworld, facilitating the deceased's passage through them. Related to the cult of Osiris and Re, portions of these spells appear on staircases and roofs of Greco-Roman temples. For example, the Dendera roof chapels where Osirian rituals were held during Koach and other festivals. A priest in the guise of a god, like Horus, would have presumably played the role of the deceased in the performance of a ritual that corresponds to Book of the Dead spell 145, interacting with each gate, guardian and passing through with the ultimate goal of joining Osiris. A new kingdom hymn to Osiris was later absorbed into the Book of the Dead corpus as spell 128. In the original temple ritual, the gods Horus, Thoth, Isis, and Nephthys, mentioned in this spell, were surely played by priests before a statue of Osiris. In the mortuary adaptation, the deceased him/herself was the first-person speaker. According to its rubric, This ritual coincided with offerings at the Wag festival, an important funerary feast celebrated in the first month of the year. Solar hymns, commonly found on stelae, pyramidia, and tomb walls, were codified into spell 15 during the Sate recension. A hymn to the rising sun known from Karnak, Medinet Habu, Dir el-Bahri, and Lua temples parallels spell 15b. Judging by the scene of the king offering to the sun, God next to this hymn on the edifice of Taraka in Karnak, the text was here part of an offering ritual. There is no question of the significance of offerings in both funerary Book of the Dead spells and earthly temple rituals. One common example, spell 148 appears in 8 different temples, in several cases more than once typically, accompanied by images of 7 cows, and a bull in front of offering tables in Book of the Dead manuscripts. Spell 148 was likely recited in conjunction with offerings on the day of burial and during 7 different festivals. The scene's occurrences in temples were linked with offerings presented to the gods. Book